My grandmother died on a Tuesday in early March, and my aunt had a locksmith at the cottage by Thursday afternoon. I found out from my grandmother's neighbor, a retired schoolteacher who had known Nana for 40 years, who called me while I was still driving north on the 400, a Tim Hortons coffee going cold in the cup holder, my eyes burning from the long Ontario winter. She described my aunt's silver Escalade parked sideways across the gravel drive, a man with a drill crouched at the front door, and my aunt standing on the porch in a fur-trimmed coat, directing him like she already owned the place. She did not own the place, not yet. My name is Wren and I am 34 years old. I work as a certified fraud examiner for a mid-sized firm in Toronto, which is a polite way of saying I spend my days finding the money people think they've hidden. I read financial statements the way some people read novels, looking always for the seam where the story breaks. That skill was the only reason I survived what my family tried to do to me. Nana's cottage sat on the eastern shore of Lake Rousseau in Muskoka, a white clapboard place with green shutters and a wraparound porch that sagged beautifully in the middle from 60 years of summers. She had bought it with my grandfather in 1971, when the land was still affordable, and she kept it long after he passed, long after the big resorts arrived, and turned everything around it into something precious and carefully priced. By the time she died, the property was assessed at $2.4 million. The investment trust she had built quietly over 5 decades was worth another 1.9. The family lawyer, a careful, deliberate man named Alec who had been Nana's solicitor for 30 years, called me 3 days after the funeral. My grandmother had revised her will 18 months prior. The cottage, the trust, and all personal assets were left solely to me. I remember sitting in my car in the parking garage below my office building, Alec's voice in my ear, and feeling something cold and large settle in my chest. Not surprise, Nana had told me once that I was the only one who had never asked her for anything. That conversation happened on this exact porch, on a September evening 4 years ago, over a glass of wine and a view of the lake going orange at the edges. I hadn't understood then what she was telling me. I understood now. Alec called my aunt 3 hours after he called me. According to him, the line went very quiet before she hung up. By Thursday morning, my aunt had arrived at the cottage with a document she claimed superseded the will entirely. I was already there. I had driven up Wednesday night after the neighbor called. I parked my car behind the woodshed out of sight. I slept on Nana's couch under Nana's quilt with Nana's old tabby cat pressed against my legs, and I did not sleep well at all. When my aunt's Escalade came up the drive, I was sitting at the kitchen table with a mug of tea, watching through the window. My uncle came out of the passenger side first, already on his phone. He ran a property development company out of Barrie, had spent 15 years pitching investors on condo projects that were always 2 quarters away from breaking ground. My aunt followed in that coat, and behind them, the man with the drill bag. I opened the front door before they reached the porch steps. My aunt stopped, something moved across her face, not guilt, adjustment. Wren, she said my name the way someone says the name of a problem they had hoped would resolve itself. What are you doing here? I live here, I said, as of last Tuesday. She shook her head slowly, the way adults do with children who are confused. She reached into her leather handbag and produced a document sheathed in a clear plastic folder. She held it out to me like an offering, like something that had already been decided. Nana signed a continuing power of attorney 14 months ago, she said. She gave me full authority over her financial and legal affairs. That includes the property. There is also a transfer of title agreement signed at the same time. The cottage was transferred into my name as part of an estate planning arrangement. She tilted her head. The will is secondary. You have no legal standing here. My uncle stepped up beside her. He was the kind of man who smiled whenever he spoke, regardless of what he was saying. Nobody wants this to be unpleasant, he said pleasantly. We can arrange to have your things couriered to the city. The locksmith is here as a precaution only. I looked at the document in her hand without touching it. Where was this drawn up? I asked. A notary in Huntsville, my aunt said. Everything is properly executed. Was Nana represented by independent counsel? The smile on my uncle's face held, but his eyes shifted a fraction. She didn't require independent counsel. She understood what she was signing. My mother arrived just before noon, which I had expected. She came up from the road on foot. She had parked below the gate, in a wool coat slightly too thin for March in Muskoka. She looked at me on the porch, and then at her sister, and then back at me, and her expression was the one she had worn my entire life. The expression of a woman who had already decided what she was going to do, but needed someone else to make it feel necessary. "Sweetheart," she said, "let's be sensible about this. Your aunt has been managing Nana's affairs for over a year. The cottage needs maintenance we simply cannot carry. If we sell, there is enough for all of us. You could pay off your condo. Isn't that what you want?" I had paid off my condo 2 years ago on my own without mentioning it to anyone in my family. My brother arrived 40 minutes later in a rented pickup he had driven from Sudbury, where he had been living since the restaurant he borrowed money to open had closed 18 months prior. He did not greet me. He walked straight to my uncle and said something low and urgent, and my uncle nodded and put a hand on his shoulder. I went back inside and locked the door. That afternoon, while my aunt made calls on the porch and my mother sat at the dock with Nana's instant coffee and my brother sulked in the Escalade, I went through Nana's files. Nana kept everything in a cedar chest beneath the guest room bed. Bank statements, property tax notices, correspondence, carbon copies of old Christmas card lists. She had been meticulous about all of it. She had also spent in the last 18 months of her life deeply troubled by what was happening to her accounts. I found the letters first, notes she had made to herself in her careful looped handwriting, beginning about 16 months ago, called the bank again. The woman said the transfer was authorized. I do not remember authorizing it. And then, a month later, my investment statement shows $47,000 less than last quarter. Asked to see the documents, she said not to worry, she, my aunt. I found the bank statements beneath the letters. I am a certified fraud examiner. I have spent 10 years looking at financial documents with this exact quality of attention, the same flat clinical focus I gave them now, sitting cross-legged on the guest room floor with the cedar chest open beside me and the cat watching from the doorway. Over 14 months, a total of $312,000 had moved out of Nana's personal investment account in irregular increments, amounts small enough to avoid automatic flagging, carefully spaced, each transfer authorized under the continuing power of attorney. The destination, traced through the account numbers on the statements, was a numbered company registered in Ontario. I wrote down the registration number on a notepad. Then I found the medical file. Nana had kept a folder of correspondence from her family doctor, a GP in Bracebridge she had seen for 20 years. There was a letter near the bottom, flagged with a yellow sticky note in Nana's handwriting that said simply, "Ask about this." The letter was from her doctor to my aunt, sent following a home visit about 16 months prior. It noted that my grandmother's beta blocker prescription appeared to have been altered, a dosage discrepancy between what had been prescribed and what her pill organizer reflected. The doctor had requested clarification. There was no response in the file, no follow-up, nothing. My grandmother had a heart attack on a Wednesday evening in early March. She had been alone at the cottage. The neighbor had found her when she noticed the lights still on past midnight. I sat very still on the floor of the guest room for a long time. Then I picked up my phone and called a number I had saved 2 years ago after a fraud case I had worked went to Crown prosecution. The Crown attorney's name was Felix, a careful, precise man from Ottawa who spoke in complete sentences and had a reputation for being extremely difficult to surprise. He answered on the second ring. "I need to speak with you," I said. "I have financial records showing large-scale fraud against an elderly woman who died 6 days ago. And I have a letter from her doctor suggesting her medication was being interfered with." There was a pause. "Where are you?" Felix asked. "Muskoka." "Stay there," he said. "Don't allow anyone onto the property until I call you back." I set my phone down and went to make more tea. Outside the kitchen window, my aunt was still on the porch, arms crossed, speaking into her phone. The lake was flat and gray under the March sky, very still, the color of old pewter. 2 mergansers moved along the far shore in a perfectly straight line. I thought about Nana on that September evening, handing me a glass of wine, telling me I had never asked her for anything. I thought about what those 16 months must have cost her, watching the account statements, writing notes to herself in that careful handwriting, not quite understanding, not quite believing that the person managing her affairs was her own niece. I kept reading until midnight. My aunt came to the door at 4 o'clock and knocked hard. "Wren, open this door. We have the right to inspect this property." I said nothing. I have a property management company arriving tomorrow morning at 8. They will enter this building whether you cooperate or not. If you are still inside, that is trespassing on a property that legally belongs to me." I thought about the doctor's letter. I thought about the $312,000. "I will be here," I said. I heard her exhale sharply through the door, then her heels on the porch boards, then the sound of the Escalade starting and backing down the drive. The RCMP arrived the following morning at 7:45 in two unmarked vehicles, followed by a third car bearing CRA identification. They came quietly, the way professionals do when they understand that restraint is more effective than performance. My aunt arrived at 8 exactly as promised, with my uncle and the property management company in a white cargo van. My brother was in the back seat. My mother had apparently decided not to come. I was standing on the porch, holding a mug of tea when they came through the gate. My uncle saw the vehicles first. He put his hand on my aunt's arm and said something very low, and she looked at the cars, and then she looked at me on the porch. I took a sip of tea. An RCMP corporal stepped out from the tree line at the side of the drive. He identified himself and stated clearly that the property was the subject of an active fraud investigation. He asked my aunt and my uncle to remain outside the property boundary and to refrain from approaching the cottage. My aunt was a lawyer. She understood immediately and completely what was happening. "This is a misunderstanding," she said, her voice very measured. "I hold power of attorney over this estate. These are legitimate estate management activities. Whatever Wren has told you." "Ma'am," the corporal said, "we are not here to discuss that with you at this time." A CIA agent approached and handed my aunt a document, an order freezing the financial accounts tied to the numbered company, whose registration number I had copied from Nana's bank statements. My uncle's phone slipped from his hand and hit the gravel. My brother got out of the Escalade. He looked at the CIA agent and then at the RCMP officers and then at me. "What did you do?" he said, not to my aunt, to me. "I read the files," I said. My aunt held her composure for another few minutes. I watched her hold it, the straight back, the controlled voice, the professional stillness she had presumably worn in courtrooms for 20 years. She was not a foolish woman. She knew the numbered company was going to be a problem. She knew the bank transfers were going to be a problem. What she didn't yet know was that Felix had flagged the doctor's letter to the medical regulator's office, or that the Huntsville notary who had witnessed the power of attorney documents was currently answering questions about my grandmother's cognitive state at the time of signing. The property management van left without anyone getting out. My uncle sat down on the hood of the Escalade and put his head in his hands. My aunt turned to look at me one final time before the corporal stepped forward. The professional stillness was gone. What was underneath it was something smaller and rawer than I had expected. "She was going to spend it all on conservation land anyway," my aunt said. It came out almost quietly, as though she were confiding something rather than defending something. She had no idea what any of it was actually worth. She would have given it away to some bird charity and never thought twice. I set my mug down on the railing. "She knew exactly what it was worth," I said. "She built it herself." My mother called me that evening from a motel in Gravenhurst. She said she was sorry. She said she hadn't understood how far it had gone. She said she was my mother and she was frightened and alone and could I please come. I told her I would cover the motel for 2 nights. I told her that after that, she would need to make her own arrangements. I told her I was not angry with her, which was true, and that I was finished, which was also true. She said my name twice more before I ended the call. The following spring was very green and very quiet. I replaced the cottage roof in April before the black flies arrived. I refinished the porch boards over 2 weekends in May because Nana had always done it herself, and I thought that particular habit was worth continuing. The cat, whose name was Wallace, developed a detailed daily schedule involving the sun patches on the kitchen floor, which I came to understand as a kind of order I was grateful to be included in. My aunt pleaded guilty to fraud over $5,000 and breach of fiduciary duty under the Ontario trustee legislation. Sentencing included a restitution order and a conditional sentence. The numbered company was dissolved. $219,000 were recovered and returned to the estate. The doctor's letter did not produce criminal charges. The evidentiary threshold was not met. I sat with that for a long time, the way you sit with something that is true and insufficient at the same time, something that does not resolve cleanly no matter how long you hold it. I used a portion of the trust to establish a legal information fund through a network of women's shelters in Simcoe and Muskoka counties. It provides resources to elderly people and their families navigating power of attorney law in Ontario. What the documents actually mean, what questions to ask, what warning signs look like. It was not a large gesture, it was practical, which is what Nana would have wanted it to be. I was at the cottage on the afternoon the final paperwork cleared and everything was officially settled. I was in the old Muskoka chair that had been on that porch since before I was born, watching the lake. It was September again. The light came low across the water in that particular way that happens at the end of summer in Muskoka. Not fading exactly, but deepening, going amber and precise, the kind of light that shows you exactly where you are. I had a glass of wine because Nana had taught me to mark an ending properly. I thought about what she had said to me 4 years ago on this same porch, that I was the only one who had never asked her for anything. I understood now what I hadn't understood then. She wasn't only describing history. She was building something patiently, carefully, across a very long time, the way she had built everything else in her life. I raised my glass to the lake and to her and to the specific and complete satisfaction of a long thing finally done right.